Postal Service had fallen through. And the original plans of the township to be behind a historic preservation effort kind of went on the back burner for a while. And by the fall of 1999, it became apparent that Ford Land still had a mandate to develop the site. And by the late 1999, around November and early December, in fact, we were down here at this very facility for our annual Motor City Packard's banquet. And I announced at that night in this room that we were going to mobilize and attempt to get a meeting with Ford Land in early 2000 to see what their plans were for the site. Because at that time there were about 322 acres left. And we knew it was beyond the scope of what we could do to save the entire site and to preserve the entire 2.5 mile oval tract. But we thought it was realistic to attempt to save what we consider the building complex, which to my left, to your right, is a site plan map of the 14-acre site that we currently have today. So what we had done was set up a meeting in early 2000 with Ford Motor Land Development executives, and I put a team of people together, and I had written the original letters to Ford Land and got a favorable response that they were happy to talk to us about it. But if we were coming down for the whole 322 acres, we could save the trip. So we met with Ford Land in late January, may have even been the first week of February of 2000, and began discussions with them on how we could negotiate the preservation of the site. At that time, we had hoped for 20 acres, and it wound up being 14. And as Mike said, it ultimately included the donation of the front 7 acres, primarily the building complex and the Van Dyke frontage, and an option to purchase in a lease arrangement on the rear, almost 7 acres. At this time, the Packard Motor Car Foundation, which took possession of the site on June 1st of 2002. So you can see it took us almost 30 months to negotiate this deal, because the Ford Land people that we had been negotiating with in 2000, I called down there in early January 2001 and found that 4 of the 5 people we had been negotiating with had retired without any further notification to us. So we had a deal in concept at that time that we had to kind of start over on, and had to re-educate the next generation of whiz kids who would come in from with Northwestern MBAs and had no appreciation for necessarily for the Packard automobile or the proving grounds. And actually we went down there one time and saw I think they had mistakenly left a big board like this up that had a site plan that had the boulevard entrance to the proving grounds was actually the footprint for the ingress and egress from a new subdivision. I said, well, I don't think you meant to leave this up, because they pointed at it, and I said, this sure isn't going to happen, is it? And they said, well, if we can't work this out, it might. So maybe they did intend to leave it up as a scare tactic. Whatever it was, it worked. And so we began negotiations afresh in 2001, and then worked our way to actually a memorandum of agreement and some other documents that involved putting the deal together with the Macomb County Road Commission, Shelby Township, Ford Land, the State Historic Preservation Office, the State Historic Preservation Network, the Federal Highway Department, because it involved some of the 23-mile road issues. And basically, it was a fairly complicated transaction that even involved Ford Land coming to the table because of, from a history standpoint, because they had taken down the Veterans Administration Hospital in Allen Park, which was on the National Register, and the State Historic Preservation Office wasn't terribly happy with them at that time and said, well, you need to show some amelioration somewhere else and some savings. So we became their favorite site. Instead of we'll bulldoze it and put a road through, it was how can we help you save this 14 acres? So things have a funny way of working out, especially when you're a building hugger like I am and like most of my committee is. But the foundation itself has 15 trustees from around the country. pretty much every geographic region is represented, although the bulk of the trustees, I think, five of the 15 are here in Michigan. And then we have several local committees, fundraising and site management and operation, and other committees that are actually running the site for a total team of around 45 people right now that are kind of performing the key jobs. That kind of gives you a thumbnail sketch of where we went the first 4 years. And a friend of mine in the Packard Club that's very active and an honorary trustee on our board is the Emmy Award-winning actor Edward Herman, primarily known these days on the History Channel, and he won his Emmy for portraying Franklin D. Roosevelt in one of those made-for-television movies. And he and his wife Star have had a chance to tour with me and go through some old car trips, and he's very much a Packard fan, and it was what could I do to help you out other than a financial contribution? And I said, well, would you be kind enough to do the narration for a DVD we'd like to produce for some of the target donors and foundations and other individuals. And what they can tell you in 24 minutes is much more concise and much better than I can. And what I thought we would do is show you this recently produced DVD that we put together, which I think gives you a lot of information. And then after the DVD, I would give you some more information and then open it up to questions and answers. Because I'm always amazed, no matter where I go to speak about the subject in this area, I wind up meeting either former Packard employees or people whose parents or uncles worked at Packard. And it's amazing, especially on the east side here, the impact that company had here, even though they closed in late June of 1956. Here we are 50 years later, almost the 50th anniversary of the Detroit closing. And it's still amazing to me how many people are around. But without further ado, I think I'll go ahead and play the DVD.
Okay, good. Have a seat and then I'll turn it on.
And after that, well, I'll come back and finish up, and then we'll do some questions and answers.
It all began in 1899 when two brothers, James Ward and William Dowd Packard, formed the Packard Motor Car Company in Warren, Ohio. In 1903, a group of investors moved the company to Detroit, which was rapidly becoming the center of the burgeoning automobile industry. There, the company would thrive and develop a well-earned reputation for quality and luxury. Car buyers and competing manufacturers recognized Packard automobiles for their excellence in engineering and styling, and the familiar phrase, "Ask the man who owns one," became the Packard advertising slogan for most of the company's history. Packard inventions, such as the steering wheel and automatic spark advance, were quickly adopted by other manufacturers. As Packard's reputation grew, it became apparent that a state-of-the-art testing facility was needed to ensure the company's leadership role in an increasingly competitive industry. In 1925, Packard officials began purchasing farmland for the construction of their proving grounds. They selected a rural site about 20 miles north of Detroit. This area would eventually become the community of Shelby Township. Packard spared no expense in the construction of the proving grounds and hired the famous architect Albert Kahn to design and supervise its construction. 20 years earlier, in 1905, Kahn revolutionized the design of industrial buildings by using reinforced concrete in the construction of building number 10 at the Packard Manufacturing Complex in Detroit, a building technique that is still used today. The Packard Proving Grounds were dedicated in the fall of 1927. By 1930, the company had invested over $1 million in the facility. designed to ensure that Packard automobiles retain their long-standing reputation for quality and reliability. The main building of the Proving Grounds is the Packard Gate Lodge. This Cotswold Tudor Revival-style building served as the residence for the manager and his family. It features 3 fireplaces, 9 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, hardwood floors, and a multicolored slate roof. An attached garage and carport provided room for 10 cars, while a dormitory above the garage area served as living space for test drivers and engineers. In the 1920s and 30s, the 20-mile trip from Detroit to the Proving Grounds took several hours. Therefore, comfortable accommodations were also available for visiting executives, clients, and dignitaries. Across from the lodge stands a 6,500 square foot repair garage where Packard engineers performed repairs, vehicle maintenance, and engineering tests. This building was constructed in 1929 and was also designed by Albert Kahn. The entrance boulevard, which is shaped like the famous Packard Grill, led to magnificent wrought iron gates. These gates opened onto the lavishly landscaped grounds, rich with flowering trees, roses, and other ornamental landscaping, in keeping with Packard's sterling reputation for elegance and perfection. At the Proving Grounds, test drivers and engineers thoroughly tested any new design or feature before mass production. Packard also randomly selected vehicles from the production line and sent them to the Proving Grounds for an operational evaluation and review of workmanship. Packard's drivers and engineers used the latest, most technologically advanced equipment available to test their automobiles. Some testing methods were less sophisticated than others, but all demonstrated the durability of Packard motor cars. Miles of grueling off-pavement test roads crisscrossed the site and were dotted with hills, curves, bumps, gravel and dirt, deep sand, and water pits. All were designed to ensure that Packard buyers were receiving a high-quality, thoroughly tested motor car that would perform well in any conceivable road conditions. The weather extremes of Michigan's 4 seasons added to the already challenging testing conditions. In contrast to the rugged test roads, the exceptionally smooth 2.5-mile oval concrete track was built to exacting tolerances. Drivers could travel around the banked curves in excess of 100 miles per hour without holding the steering wheel. The Packard test track soon gained a reputation as one of the world's fastest tracks. Before it was even completed, Indianapolis 500 race car driver Leon Duray set a world land speed record of 148.7 miles per hour. This feat was accomplished on June 14, 1928, just 2 weeks after Duray won the Indy 500 with his Miller race car. Duray's speed record on the Packard test track would stand until the early 1950s. In addition to testing its automobiles, Packard also used the Proving Grounds for the development and testing of its DR-980 radial diesel airplane engine. In the 300-acre track infield, the company constructed a runway that led to a 4,000 square foot steel airplane hangar near the north end of the track. Famed aviator Colonel Charles Lindbergh visited the site twice in 1929 to test fly an airplane powered by Packard's DR-980. Here is Colonel Lindbergh with Packard President Alvin McCauley. In May 1931, pilots Walter Lees and Fred Brossi set a world flight endurance record of 84 hours and 33 minutes with a Packard-powered Balanca. This was a record that would stand until 1986. Packard spared no expense at its Proving Grounds, which reflected the elegant image the company conveyed. The facility more closely resembled the homes of the auto barons in places like Grosse Pointe, Michigan, than an automotive testing facility. Packard was proud of the Proving Grounds and used it as a backdrop for many of its advertising campaigns, like this example in Fortune magazine in the early 1930s. This advertisement speaks of the Packard you will never see, a production auto that has been consigned to a tortuous existence as a test car at the Proving Grounds, all in the interests of building a high-quality motor car. The practice of using the site for advertising continued into the 1950s.
Now look to Packard.
Look to Packard for built-in quality and proved performance.
The new Packard V8 engine delivers more driving force to the rear wheels than any other engine. It's America's easiest handling, safest riding car. Your Packard dealer invites you to see and drive the greatest Packard of them all. Packard for 1956.
In addition to advertising, the site was used for dealer shows and demonstrations for the Packard dealer network from across the United States and around the world. During World War II, Chrysler Defense Engineering leased the proving grounds to test tanks and other armored vehicles. Testing and repairs to prototype tanks outgrew the repair garage and hangar. So architect William Edward Capp, famed designer of Meadowbrook Hall on the nearby Dodge estate in Rochester, Michigan, was hired by the War Department and Chrysler to design a new garage building. This wartime building was constructed to the west of the original Packard repair garage and was ready for use in 1944. After the war, Packard resumed automotive testing at the site. The company repaired the test track and converted the new tank garage into an experimental and engineering laboratory. The lab contained a special climate room that allowed engineers to test engines, chassis, and electrical components, as well as fuels and lubricants under conditions of extreme heat and cold. By October 1954, the company's fortunes were on the decline. And in an attempt to survive in a market dominated by the big three automakers, Packard purchased and merged with Studebaker. Meanwhile, at the Proving Grounds, test drivers and engineers conducted a durability run with a 1955 Packard Patrician to test the vehicle and its components while demonstrating the power and endurance of the company's new overhead valve V8 engine. For 7 days, the car was driven continuously around the track, 24 hours a day. The vehicle stopped only for fuel, tires, driver changes, and minor maintenance. When the durability run was over, the drivers had taken the Patrician 25,000 miles around the track, or an amazing 10,000 laps at an average speed of 104.7 miles per hour. Despite ongoing efforts at the Packard Proving Grounds, a number of factors began to put the future of Studebaker Packard in doubt. During the 1950s, fierce competition between Detroit's Big Three left smaller independents with rising production costs and dwindling market shares. By 1956, the Studebaker Packard Corporation was in serious financial difficulty. Under the terms of a management deal and financial bailout with aircraft engine manufacturer Curtiss Wright, the Packard Proving Grounds were shut down after millions of miles of testing, all without a serious injury or fatality. The Packard plant on East Grand Boulevard was also shut down as manufacturing operations were consolidated at Studebaker's headquarters in South Bend, Indiana. 2 years later, the Packard name was phased out and faded into automotive history. The Ford Motor Company purchased the Proving Ground facility in 1961. A portion was used to produce automotive trim parts and for parts storage. Today, the manufacturing facilities continue to operate as the Utica Vestion Automotive Trim Plant. Little else would be done to the rest of the facility over the next 35 years. By the mid-1990s, the original building complex had outlived its usefulness to Ford. The buildings had been used for storage, but as human activity ceased at the site, Mother Nature took over. Trees and other vegetation began to engulf the site, obscuring the gate lodge from view. For decades, the Proving Grounds waited for rediscovery. A new century brought a renewed interest in the historical significance of this site. Thanks to the efforts of Hillary Davis and the rest of the Shelby Township Historical Committee, the historic significance of the Packard Proving Grounds was recognized in 2000 when the site was determined to be eligible for listing on the prestigious National Register of Historic Places. The year 2002 would mark a rebirth and a new beginning for the Packard Proving Grounds. After 2 years of negotiations, a deal was announced on June 9th by Ford Motor Land Development Corporation, the Packard Motor Car Foundation, and Shelby Township. Here, Sean McCourt, chairman of Ford Land, turns over the ceremonial key to John MacArthur, president of the Packard Motor Car Foundation, as Shelby Township Supervisor Ralph Macarone, a key participant in the negotiation process, stands by. Work began on a new master plan for the nearly 14 acres that contains most of the buildings and a small portion of the test track. The plan calls for the restoration of the gate lodge to its former grandeur as it appeared in Packard's heyday. As the Museum of Automotive Testing, this grand structure will tell the story of the site and its unique role in automotive testing and development. The Tudor-style Packard Repair Garage will serve as a combined exhibit space and full-service banquet facility that will be available to the public for meetings, luncheons, and other special events. The Chrysler Building will become the Arsenal of Democracy Museum and will tell the story of the automotive industry's role in World War II, the greatest conversion from private enterprise to wartime production that has ever occurred in this country. It's an important story of courage and sacrifice that needs to be told to future generations. In order to accomplish these goals, the Packard Motor Car Foundation took on the daunting task of restoring the buildings after decades of neglect. A volunteer work crew provided by Daimler Chrysler's Mount Elliott tool and die plant were assigned to the site and quickly set to work removing the overgrowth. This work restored the gate lodge to the view of thousands of motorists who use Van Dyke every day. Many township residents pointed out that they never knew the lodge was there. Another important project in 2002 was the painting of the elevated water storage tank. As summer gave way to the fall, the tank was primed and repainted in Packard green. In January of 2003, a basic electrical hookup allowed the lights to be turned on in the gate lodge for the first time in years. That same year, as the snow came off the ground, demolition of the retired Packard test track began to make room for a large residential redevelopment project. In May of 2003, Ford Land, the Packard Motor Car Foundation, and Shelby Township were recognized by Michigan Governor Jennifer Granholm with one of the first 5 Governor's Awards for Historic Preservation. A month later, the Michigan region of the Classic Car Club of America held its annual Carnival of Cars at the Packard Proving Grounds. This event marked the 50th anniversary of the very first visit that the CCCA had made to the Proving Grounds since Packard opened the gates and welcomed the club to visit the site in 1953. The only building not on the Packard Motor Car Foundation site was the aviation hangar, one of the very few structures of its type to survive unmodified from the 1920s. In order to save it, the hangar had to be moved. Professional building movers were brought in to accomplish the task. The hangar was heavily braced, lifted from its slab, and moved almost a mile to the foundation's parcel. It was a tight fit past the timing stand. But once on the site, the hangar was placed on its new footings and anchored down. Restoration of a rare piece of aviation history will continue along with the other buildings on the site. Into the fall of 2003, crews worked to restore the Packard Proving Grounds logo to the elevated water storage tank for the first time since the 1950s. Roof repairs were begun on the major buildings of the site, like this section of flat roofing on the north end of the lodge. A crew of volunteers also worked on the roof on the original wooden powerhouse, much to the dismay of the squatters that had to find other living quarters. In October of 2003, the Packard Motor Car Foundation held a public open house at the Proving Grounds. Members of Motor City Packards, the Michigan region of Packard Automobile Classics, were invited, and the event was publicized in local newspapers. Organizers hoped between 200 people. They weren't ready for the estimated 800 visitors that dropped by for a tour that day. This tremendous turnout illustrates the amount of local interest in this historic site and further energized restoration efforts. But before the buildings could be refurbished and restored, they had to be made weather-tight once again. After several years of minimal or no maintenance, the roof of the Packard Repair Garage was in critical need of rehabilitation. The roof in the former dynamometer room had several serious leaks, and its support structure had deteriorated. In 2004, a professional commercial roofing crew set to work rebuilding the roof surfaces on the experimental and engineering lab, which included replacement of deteriorated decking. Workers discovered that a lot of the support structure had been seriously damaged by water and rotting. This necessitated the construction of duplicate roofing supports like this truss. Most of the dynamometer roof was removed. Sections that could be saved were retained. A new roofing deck was installed, restoring watertight integrity to the garage. The work continued on the main roof of the repair garage. Water-damaged rafters and trusses were repaired or replaced, as well as decking that was damaged beyond repair. Once all structural repairs were made, a new coal tar roofing surface was installed. In October of 2004, the site's new flagpole was dedicated. The 60-foot pole was a gift to the Packard Proving Grounds from the Shelby Macomb Daybreakers Kiwanis Club. The dedication ceremony was conducted by members of the Old Settlers VFW post of Shelby Township. A Shelby Township resident donated a 12-foot by 18-foot U.S. flag that is flown with pride at the site. 2005 would see the Packard Proving Grounds come alive with activity once again as the winter snows melted. Efforts got underway immediately to re-roof this small carriage-style garage to the north of the repair garage and experimental lab. The old layers of roofing were stripped off, new decking applied, and a new shingle surface installed. The Elms of Honor was a very successful project that was undertaken in the spring of 2005. Participants in the program donated a Princeton elm tree to the Packard Proving Grounds, which allowed the restoration of the elegant elms that once lined the parkway. The original elm trees at the Packard Proving Grounds fell victim to the Dutch elm disease and were removed from the site some time ago. Through the Elms of Honor program, the original tree locations were identified and Princeton elms planted in those exact original locations. The Princeton elms have a high resistance to Dutch elm disease and allowed a recreation of the National Historic landscape the Packard Proving Grounds represents. With the roofs restored, work is now beginning on mortar repair and external painting of the buildings. Once exterior restoration is complete, efforts will concentrate on the restoration and adaptation of interior spaces. The work is being accomplished with volunteer help when possible, but many operations require professional help. Water was originally supplied by a well that is no longer serviceable, and hooking up to the city's water line will be expensive. Other skilled trades such as electrical upgrades, plaster repair, and wood and glass restoration, and new landscaping will also require funding. But we've come too far to stop, or even slow down. Public interest and support from both near and far is the key to our continued momentum. In 2005, the state of Michigan recognized the Packard Proving Grounds as a registered state historical site. The dedication ceremony for the state historical marker took place in August and was attended by over 100 people. 2 former Packard employees performed the unveiling. 87-year-old Fred Schulwitz, who worked at both the downtown plant and the Proving Grounds, and 96-year-old Carl Alts, former test driver at the Proving Grounds from 1934 to 1956. This recognition further validates the tremendous effort undertaken by the Packard Motor Car Foundation and scores of volunteers who are determined to bring this site back to life. Over 80 years ago, the Packard Proving Grounds was established to test and evaluate Packard automobiles. Today, as it prepares to take on its important new role as a museum and interpretive learning center, The Packard Motor Car Foundation is counting on your support. Your donations, large and small, will help us continue our efforts so that new generations can learn of Packard's proud contribution to the automobile industry. And just as important, the Arsenal of Democracy Museum will ensure that the effort and sacrifice made in World War II by the greatest generation this country has ever known will never be forgotten. This is Edward Herman. Please consider a donation today.
This is where we say roll the credits. Thank you. I'm glad that this had the same reception it has had wherever we've shown it. And I think it's a nice piece that Ed Herman and Craig Handley put together for us. And that would be a very expensive piece to put together. And Word Pictures, Craig Handley's company, and Ed Herman donated all of their time. So we were able to produce these basically at cost, which is nice because we can pass that savings on and actually use it as a fundraising tool. I thought it was interesting to see the picture of Carl Altz. Carl and his dog, Tuco, basically are at the site almost every day, delivering things to and from the site. He's 96 and a half now, and he comes out to the site and just marvels at the progress we've made out there, and is really happy to see the site coming alive again. So from driving there from 1934 to 56, now 50 years later, thinking, and he's a great resource. We'll walk around the site with him and say, Carl, what about this building over here now? You know, what was the color of the trim here? And he remembers everything. Wow. We haven't caught him in too many slip-ups yet, a couple minor ones, where we'll present him with a picture and say, well, maybe it was white. I thought it was green, but maybe not. So we do have some of the historical photographs for you to take a look at too up in the front. And, this year we're concentrating on building exteriors. We have a fairly aggressive work schedule that Ford Motor Land Development has mandated as part of our agreement that by the end of 2007 certain things have to have been accomplished, primarily exteriors and cosmetics and landscaping, because quite reasonably they wanted, as this is the entrance to this new subdivision, they want the site to look good, and so we're sprucing up all of the exteriors. And in fact, finish paint, I was telling Mike, is going on this week on the engineering building, the repair garage, and most of the gate lodge. And the sort of the cream and the chocolate brown of the typical Tudor style, which you see a lot down here in the points, is the way that building originally looked. And they're in remarkably good condition. So we feel at Ford and Ford Land, we're good trustees of the site, because the bulk of the interiors, it's a lot of cosmetics, some floor refinishing, but all the original doors are still there, the hardware is still there. It's kind of a time warp. It's like walking back 50 years ago because they've left it in good shape. So we've got big plans for the site, and as Edward Herman said, this doesn't happen without financial sacrifice as well, and we would certainly appreciate any type of a pledge or contribution that any of you feel like you're in a position to make. It will all go to good use and be permanently recognized at the site. And I encourage you to get out to the site when you can. There are usually people there, and they're happy to show it to you if you want to get out there during the weekdays.
Are there specific hours that you're open then?
Right now, we're open for special events, but generally if the workers are there, there are a couple site managers out there, and Alan Mabbitt and Bruce Webster, who are happy to show people around. In fact, we've gotten a lot of local volunteers from the Sterling Heights, Shelby Township, Utica area that just stop by. And, some of them are retirees who say, hey, I've got weekends, I can help you out here. And the volunteer list continues to grow. But certain things, of course, have to be done professionally, and that's where the major expenses are in electrical, plumbing, HVAC kinds of things are where the big bucks will be down the road.
Well, and the drive is the entrance to the subdivision already? Or will
It's
be?
not, the entrance to the subdivision is just south of us. Of course, we all think they lost some great naming opportunities when they named the development Central Park West or something. We had hoped that they would pick up on the Packard history, and we'd have a Macaulay Avenue and a Vincent, and some of the early the Joys and the Algers and things like that that were instrumental in moving the company here. But they didn't. They picked up on, you think you're in New York City or something like the street names.
Your grandfather was a chief body design
Yeah,
engineer?
my grandfather started there in late 1928 and left there in the summer of 1956 after the Detroit closure, and went to Ford Motor with Herb Bish and some of the other, he was chief engineer at the time, and some of the other design team and body engineering people, a lot of them relocated to Ford and the rest of the big three. Yes, sir.
What did he do during the war? Work on the engines?
It's my understanding that he had some involvement with, Packard was building the Merlin engine under license from Rolls-Royce, and in fact had improved upon the performance of the engine. But, and he was also doing developmental planning for post-war production. They were all hopeful that World War II wouldn't last forever, and he was gearing up for post-war production. Yeah, the DVD will be available fairly soon. The initial production run has been completed, and we haven't at this point set a price on it. It'll be a modest price because we got such a good break from the people that produced it. But the address is on the brochures that were on your chairs, and if you're interested in a DVD, maybe drop us a line, and we'll be glad to send you one. Yes, sir.
Where or when did the Algers become involved with Packard?
It was my understanding that Henry B. Joy put an investment group together that was kind of headquartered here in the Grosse Pointe, and approached the Packard brothers in Warren, Ohio, basically saying that we feel that the automotive industry is going to be headquartered in Detroit, and that, like many of the other companies in the early 20th century that fell by the wayside, they felt that if Packard was to survive, it needed to be in kind of the heart of the automotive industry. And they persuaded the Packard brothers to move the company here so that they could begin producing the 1903 cars here in Detroit. There was another question back there. Yes, sir.
When I was in probably 10 years old, probably in the 50s, my grandfather had us, my brother and I, go around the track many times. My grandfather in the 50s was the chief engineer at Packard Motor Track. I don't know if you're familiar with James Robert Ferguson.
Oh, sure, J.R. Ferguson.
That was my grandfather.
My grandfather used to talk about him quite a lot.
Yeah, and he retired in 1955, and of course we always say you got out the year before the
The
company.
year before.
So I'd like to talk to you and get more information because I've always been a fan of Packard.
Absolutely.
And one thing that I'd like to talk to you about, if it relates to this arsenal of democracy, is in 1945, when the war was going on, my grandfather was 60 years old. He was commissioned in the Army as a colonel, and he and 4 or 5 other gentlemen who were well known in sciences and engineering went in after the troops to try to determine what spoils of war that the Germans have been working on. And so I've got the pictures, I've got reports, I've got all kinds of stuff my grandfather saved. And I don't know if I'd like to talk to you privately and see, because I've always been a fan of Packard.
We'd be very interested in that. My grandfather was a big fan of your grandfather. He thought J.R. Ferguson was really top notch. And I think he succeeded Clyde Payton.
I don't remember all the hierarchy, but I remember you talking about Mr. Mish, or Mish, I always heard that name.
Yeah, Mish, and then Clyde Payton. I think Mish wound up the last year as chief engineer. He had been elevated from, I think, J.R.'s subordinate became chief engineer. And Clyde Payton's daughter in Bloomfield Hills is still around, Eleanor Payton.
Well,
She's a member of her.
I don't know if the gentleman you said that was the test driver that was 97 years old, I don't know if he was the one that drove us around the tracks whenever we went out there.
He might have been, Carl.
My grandfather did drive us at 90, 100 miles an hour.
Carl was there. I asked Carl Altz one time, I said, how did you used to test these high-speed blowouts. How did you, I heard about that to see if the car would maintain control. And he said, well, we just cut a hole in the fender well, and I would take a double-barreled 12-gauge shotgun, and hit 100 miles an hour. We'd go out there and shoot the tire off going around the lap and see how the car did.
Did they have helmets on?
And as you heard, I mean, they didn't lose a single person. And, Carl blew up one of the Weasels. It was a track vehicle from World War II. It had a bad fuel leak, and they didn't realize it. In those days, somebody was near the track entrance, and it kind of casually flipped a cigarette that way, and blew Carl right out through the hatch. He had just taken his seat, and he landed on the infield and kind of got up and dusted himself off and walked away from it. Carl is actually in that picture of the tank behind the building with all the people sitting on it. He's one of the guys on there. And years later, he decided that he would identify himself in the team picture out in front of the timing stand by wearing white shoes. So I don't know if you noticed it, but in the picture, he's the only one wearing white shoes. And still out there on a daily basis today. He's kind of one of our inspirations out there.
I haven't heard anything lately, but last I heard, the city of Detroit was not being very kind to the Packard property. Do you know the status of the Packard?
You know, that's been in almost a constant state of litigation for about the last 6 years. As to ownership rights, part of it was demolished, then there was an investment group put together that claimed to have title to part of it, and the Court of Appeals had ruled that yes, indeed, they did have title, and then they were trying to determine damages because part of it had been taken down, and it's a real mess. And we have been promised some of the artifacts if, in fact, the rest of the demolition occurs on the executive office complex along the boulevard. But and the land bridge is still there that goes over East Grand Boulevard. There's the clocks and the shape of the radiator over there, things like that we hopefully will be able to preserve. The two major door openings, the one that says Packard in 1907, we hope to get that and maybe incorporate it somehow into the site in Shelby.
Do you expect that they're really going to multiple?
That appears to be the long-term plan.
Have you got the clock already over there or no?
We don't at this point.
Who's got it?
I'm not sure who, because some of that's been dismantled, and I don't know where it all went. It's amazing, though, that some of the things that were at the proving grounds are beginning to show up again. We sort of don't ask any questions. But, the guy dropped off and said, this is timing equipment from the timing stand. And we don't say, well, gee, how'd you get that? Well, no, I got it.
You mentioned that you've owned Packards over the years. How many have you had?
I've had about 10 or 11 over the years. I currently have 3. I have a 1910 Model 18, they call it a close couple touring car. That kind of about the vintage of when the end of the Packard plant was being made. I think that was in operation until 1910, so it'd be a contemporary of that plant. And then with all the brass on it. And I have a 1930 convertible sedan with a custom body by Brewster of New York. There's just 2 of those left. Otis Chandler, who recently passed away in Los Angeles, he has the other one, or his estate does. And then I have a 48 convertible.
You mentioned the Packard plant. Studebaker was there. I was unaware that Packard was on Packard.
Oh, no.
He was
I
just talking about
say
that era.
It was my car is a contemporary when that plant was in existence, but Packard wasn't over there. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to confuse. Yes, sir.
What are the directions to get out to the site? Yeah.
Well, the site is about 22.5 mile road in Van Dyke. So if you were heading out from the points, you could, some people I know take I-94 right to 23 mile road and then just go west. You could take it to Hall Road and go west to Van Dyke and up 2 miles. Either way you get there, I don't necessarily recommend the way that Packard used to do it, which was to leave the factory complex on East Grand and go out Van Dyke all the way. That takes a while.
So the entrance is on Van Dyke
It
itself?
is. It is on Van Dyke. Right about it, almost halfway, which is why Ford Land thought it would make such an ideal spot to put the entrance to their subdivision. It's about halfway up.
You're referring to that Ford subdivision. Is that actually something that Ford developed, a
Ford-
subdivision?
Ford sold the land, actually he sold in early 2002, 175 acres of the undeveloped tract land to Grand Sacwa, which then subbed it out to several builders, including Pulte and Lombardo Homes and some others. But they basically just brokered the real estate and sold it.
John, that drawing again in front of you, can you grab it and pull it up there for just a second?
This one?
Yeah, now that entryway, the grass in the center is in the shape of the radiators, right? And there's Van Dyke to the right, right?
This is Van Dyke over.
And then at the opposite end is the piece of the test track that you're gonna save, the 450 feet?
Yeah, we have 458 feet of track on the west edge. The timing stand is right here. And then these are where the elms of honor all went back in, the 80 elm trees went in there. This is the engineering building that'll be the Arsenal Democracy Museum. And up in the northwest corner is where we moved the hangar. We call it the Lindbergh Hangar because it's a catchy name. I think he was there for about 4 hours. We refer to it as the Lindbergh Hangar, but then the gate lodge is here.
And the engineering building was built by Chrysler for the tank operations?
Yeah, it was built late '43 and opened in early '44. And the engineering building is kind of an interesting building because it's during wartime. Steel was at such a premium you couldn't get it, so it's primarily masonry, cement block, and then wood truss design that Packard later sandwiched around the wood trusses, the steel, and sort of retrofitted a steel substructure to the roof. The building wasn't intended to last forever. It was meant for tank testing and track vehicle testing, and just wanted it to survive the war. But here it is 60 years later, and it's still in good shape.
That's diesel aircraft engines that they developed. Was it ever put into production or used commercially or any military way?
Not military, but it was put into production, and they did produce a fair number of them. They were used on mail planes, and they felt they were a little safer with diesel being a little more resistant to fire, and safety factors and longevity. And they built quite a few of them.
Didn't they use those engines in PT boats?
They
built a special plant just off of Hartford.
Right, during World War II, Packard produced a V12 marine engine, a 1,500 horsepower engine, the 1M2500 they called it, the PT boat engine, and modified it a little bit during the war, but they basically supplied all of the engines for the PT boats.
That engine you just got from the Historical Museum, is it? Is that on loan or is that?
It's on long-term loan from the Historical Museum. We have
Detroit
a
Historical
PT boat engine at the site now, and we also have a minesweeper engine, which is a pretty unique piece because it came out of the Packard crate. It's never been in a ship. And it's brand new. It still has Cosmoline kind of caked all over it. And it's never been in a ship. It has almost 0 hours on it. And it's unique because it's all made with non-ferrous metals because of the magnetic lines. So it's all bronze and brass and copper and stainless and other things that won't blow the magnets away.
On the,
Probably not.
they make gas turbine engines out there too during the 50s. Whatever became of that? I mean,
That operation was one of the few that we think that when Curtis Wright basically bought the facility in '56 to basically sell off the pieces, that was one of the few operations that they kept around for a while where was to work with the jet aircraft engine plant on Mound Road. And they operated for a while. It's in the back there.
I'm been working on some information that I'm going to do, be speaking to the Packard group on the waterfront heritage of the Packard and doing their air cruise. And would you mind if I shared a couple minutes on some early history of how important Packard was and how quickly those early years went by and historians have forgotten what was going on. But James Packard and Henry Joy were really remarkable people. I don't think there's a lot of background on them other than to say they were both wealthy, grew up very wealthy people. They were yachtsmen. They could afford to do what they wanted to do, but they really applied themselves to this new technology that was going on. But Henry B. Joy did not get scalded by a steam car and decide that that's why he was going to buy the Packard. Because that myth shows up often. But Henry Joy was a partner with Charles B. King, who built the first car in the city of Detroit, in a marine engine business. And it was Charles B. King's fiancée who acquired the first Packard in the city of Detroit. So in 1901, Henry Joy bought a Packard, and he personally invested in the Packard company. It was later that he got his brother and his brother-in-law and the Algers and the Macmillans to invest heavily in the company. But we can't overlook how important Packard was to the automotive industry in Detroit. Because in 1901, the only thing that was going on of any importance in the automobile industry in Detroit was Ransom Olds discontinued his marine engine business and went into production of the automobile. And that year became the largest manufacturer of gas-powered automobiles in the world. But prior to that, nothing was going on of any importance. And in 1902, there was still nothing going on of much more importance when the Joys convinced Packard to not go to Cleveland, which wasn't receiving them very well. Cleveland could have so easily been the automotive capital for every other reason that Detroit's given credit in its early years for why it became. Ford became so important later, but in 1901, 1902, Ford wasn't creating the automobile industry in Detroit. Ransom Olds was. He brought in all these people to train them and got them involved in the industry. And then the Joys said, well, let's have we want a more luxurious car and let's bring them up here because Detroit had investable money and it had talent. And Packard said, yeah, Cleveland's not showing much interest. They got the Winton, which was much more active before Detroit. They got the Winton, and that's all I think they need. So, yeah, I'll go with you guys. And they brought in a lot. They brought hundreds of thousands of dollars into the investment that first year and brought it to Detroit. And that gave this massive automobile production in Detroit that immediately exceeded anything else that was going on anyplace else. And that can't be overlooked. And then Joy continued to lead the industry. I mean, he was often recorded as the guy who said, let's just do something. Even if it's wrong, let's do something. And, well, Ford wouldn't get involved in the Lincoln Highway Association. When Joy left his active involvement in Packard, it was to see that there was a road system built. And because Carl Fisher, who developed the Indianapolis 500, who spearheaded this, said, the automobile industry is not going to be anything if we don't have good roads for them to drive on. And it was Joy who became the first president and led this whole thing and campaigned for it. Packard is extremely important, and they were making marine engines in 1904. And in 1905, they almost won the Gold Cup, but they were beaten on a technicality by a two-cycle engine with a supercharger. And about that time, most automobile manufacturers started to withdraw from the marine engine racing scene because the difference in an automobile engine and a marine engine was starting to become quite apparent. But getting back to, by the time they were at the Proving Grounds, they had already been back in the marine engine business again, and they were in it and competing. And later, Garwood was using their engines to win a number of Gold Cups, and they did power all of the PT boats. Actually, Gray Marine and Packard Motor Company powered the Navy's small boats, and there was a decision made to use the Gray Marine diesel in the landing craft and the Packard gas engines in the PT boats. And Packard became a little bit too dependent on government contracts. And after the war, all of the independents in all of those related industries suffered badly, and few of them survived.
By the way, if anybody hasn't seen Mike Dixon's new book on the marine heritage of the automobile industry, he'll be one of our speakers this fall, and you're there to take a look at it. But
Thank you for giving me a couple minutes. Packard's really important. Much overlooked.
Thank you.
The question was, Joy Road named after Henry Joy?
Yeah, well,
Yes.
see,
Well, the one in
And,
Mount Clemens.
and the one in Mount Clemens,
the
yeah.
Selfridge Air Base was started out as his personal airfield, and
So George Boulevard in Mount Clemens.
the Crescent Boat Club's Mammoth Boathouse
Exactly,
and his
was
private
yep.
boat yard. And he continued to be very interested in fast planes, fast boats, and fast cars for the rest of his life, as did Colonel Benson, who came in and kept Packard involved in high-speed engines. They were really master, well, as the book says, master motor. What was it, master motor?
Master Motor Builders.
Master motor builders, yeah.
In fact, Joy had a little bit of a problem with the Packard board in 1915. He had proposed that a good part of his land, which is now Selfridge Air National Guard Base, be used as a proving ground. Packard didn't think, they thought they could adequately continue to test the vehicles the way they were. And then by 25, when the Milford Proving Ground was established for General Motors, Packard realized that they thought they'd have to have their own proving ground, and went out to Shelby Township and began that purchase. But it's kind of interesting that Joy's involvement is all through it.
What I understand, and this is my last comment, I'm asking you to correct me on this one, is the final straw in this post-war era that the independents had a hard time competing in, and a lot of it was because their main sources of things got gobbled up rapidly by the automobile, the big three, who had to fill up a huge pent-up demand for passenger automobiles. So that put out most of the independent marine engine manufacturers out of business. And then wasn't it that when Chrysler bought Briggs Body Works that Packard gave up?
That had a lot to do with it, and the relocation of their assembly operations from East Grand over to the Conner Avenue plant. There are a lot of factors involved, but that certainly was one of them. Thank you. There's some other questions. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the V12 engine. Packard built some V12 automotive engines prior to World War II.
Yes, sir.
I don't know how
From
many. It's pretty
1915
rare.
to 1922. For about 7 years. 1915, they came out with what they called the Twin Six, and people in the New York City Auto Show lined up around the block to see it, because at that time a huge automotive engine was a six, but the idea of a Twin Six, a V12, was unheard of. So, and then they brought it back in 1932 to 1939. So they basically built the V12 automotive engines for 2 7-year periods. Yes, sir.
Just a footnote to Mike Dixon. He referred to Garwood, and I remember as a kid, my grandmother had a cottage up at Algonac on the St. Clair River. Right next to her place, Garwood had his shop. And I remember as a kid looking in the window up through there, and my dad would come over and say, "What are you looking at, son?" And I said, "Those engines, Dad, they say Rolls-Royce. They say Rolls-Royce," but he said, "No, son, those are made by Packard." And then he, during the war, he built a hull that was going to be to cover the PT boats so that they could go in close and come out of a ship. It was a hollow ship. It was in my classic boating magazine. I remember they did an article. And I remember as a kid seeing that boat driving up and down, and Garwood drove that boat up and down that little stretch of St. Clair River. But he was quite a well, of course he won the Gold Cup with a Packard engine.
It was Miss America series.
Yes, Miss America, that's right. Yes, he did. Yes.
John, you may be biased a bit, but do you think Packard was better than Rolls-Royce at its peak?
I mean,
was it the best car in the world?
In terms of automotive production?
Yeah.
I mean, like by 1930, Packard, as a Brewster built bodies for Packard just 1 year, and they were the primary bodybuilder for Rolls-Royce of America. I mean, Rolls-Royce built a very fine automobile, and there were a lot of them in the 20s and 30s that I thought were comparable. Pierce Arrow, Marmon, Duesenberg, some of the other high-end automobiles, some of the Cadillacs, the multi-cylinder, the V12 and V16 Cadillacs. So there are a lot of nice ones, but I'd put Packard right in there with them, head and shoulders above. I mean, from 1925 to 42, when production stopped for the war, they had sold more luxury cars than all the others combined. But there were certainly a lot of other fine automobile manufacturers. We should note that Bill Chapin's in the room. I see you back there. And it should be noted that in these negotiations with Ford, that Bill played an important role in our early discussions with Ford Land and helped us with put that deal together with Ford Land. So I think a round of applause for Bill would be appropriate.
Is that why you said nothing?
I saw him kind of hiding there.
Is that why you said nothing?
Recognize him anyway.
Is that why you said nothing negative about Hudson so far?
Oh, that's right. That's right. The Hornet,
You would have been
6.
caught. You would have been caught, believe me.
Well, you can't say a bad thing about Hudson. But, or some of the others. Are there
Any other
additional questions?
There's plenty of tea back here. So,
Certainly you can
stick
contact
around
us
for a
at
while.
that address on the brochure. We'd be happy to talk to you. If you have a group that wants to see the site, we'd be glad to show you around.
Your website is in there too?
It is.
And there's a contact the president on the website, so John can be reached.
Yep.
And I'm sure Edsel Ford would certainly have appreciated the Packard sign going back on the water tower. I always thought it looked better with the Ford logo on it.
You're biased.
Yeah, I'm biased.
Actually, the story on the water tower was the demolition permit had been pulled for that water tank because the one at Visteon had been taken down. Next was that one. Wow. Because Bill Jr. had been out to a soccer match in Shelby Township and saw the rusty tower with the Ford oval and said, that's ridiculous, that looks terrible, that's got to come down. And it was the next week that our friends at Shelby Township put a hold on the permit and said, you need to talk to these folks real soon because the water tower is going to come down. So we kind of beat them to the punch on that one. We said, we'll strip it and paint it and it'll look nice again.